This week's parasha, Parashat Vayelech, starts off with a pasuk. Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokechem, etc., etc. And usually in these short videos of Divrei Torah that I upload for the Midrashah, obviously the idea is to give a nice, inspiring idea about Parashat Shavua. However, this time I'm actually going to deviate from that norm, and unfortunately I'm going to raise a question and an issue which I'm not really going to suggest an answer for. And I would obviously welcome any input from anyone who listens to this shiur for what they think. So as I said, the pasuk starts with Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elokechem, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells the Am Yisrael just prior to their entering Eretz Yisrael that they are standing today in front of Hashem in order to make a covenant with Hashem. And as we know, this is the second covenant that Am Yisrael make with Hashem ever since Yetziat Nitzavim. The first one being in Har Sinai, and the second one over here in Arvot Moav prior to their entry to Eretz Yisrael. And what Moshe Rabbeinu emphasizes in the beginning of the parsha is, number one, he's turning to the whole of Am Yisrael, from Roshechem, Shiftechem, Ziknechem, Eshotechem, Kol Ish Yisrael, each and every Jew. And then he carries on afterwards, and he says, in Pasuk Yud Gimel, in Perek Kaftet, V'lo itchem levadchem, Anochi kolet et habrit hazot v'tala hazot. This covenant is not only with you here, but also not only with those standing here in front of Hashem today, but also those who are not here today and those who will be here in the future. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu is making covenant not with that generation alone, but with the whole Jewish people in all future generations. And this week I was actually reading a Pew Research survey that was done 2 or 3 years ago about the state of Judaism and religiosity amongst Jews in America. And unfortunately, that survey gives a very, very grim picture about the state of events amongst Jews as such in America. I'll just give a few statistics to get a feel. These are just really a few of a very large research that was done about American Jewry. For example, they found over there that only 21% of Jews think that religion is important in any way, versus 41% of the general population in America. Another interesting statistic, only 26% of Jews believe in the biblical God, versus over 50% of the general public. Only about 12% of Jews attend shul at least once a week, versus 27% of the general public. I just want to mention as well that we have to remember that, well, that's another statistic which is also very interesting, obviously, but as things stand today, only about 9% of American Jewry are in fact Orthodox. All the other 91% of American Jewry are either Reform, Conservative, or are actually just non-affiliated at all. So for example, like 12% of Jews attend shul once a week. We have to remember that's basically only the Orthodox community, which make up 9% of the Jewish population in America. I don't even want to go into the finer details of assimilation and intermarriage in America, but according to this research, overall there's about a 42% level of intermarriage, meaning basically 4 in every 10 Jews have a non-Jewish spouse. What's unfortunately interesting is that in the last decade, intermarriage apparently has reached something like 60%, meaning of Jews who got married in the last 10 years, 6 out of 10 are married to a non-Jewish spouse. Now, just very, again, there are a lot of statistics in this research, but I'll just mention one very interesting statistic which I found was that they found that specifically amongst Jews, which is not really applicable amongst Christians, is that the higher level of education a person has, statistically you have more chance of becoming non-religious or completely unaffiliated to anything religious. In other words, college students and beyond, first, second, third degrees students, Jewish students, the more education they have statistically, the less religious they become. That's obviously also a very unfortunate and interesting statistic as well. My point in bringing all these statistics is in fact just reflecting back on what I started speaking about in the Parsha. In the Parsha, Moshe Rabbeinu talks to all of the Jewish people, and he says to them, "Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem," all of you are standing here in front of a covenant with Hashem, and this covenant is not only for you, but even for all future generations of Jews. And what we see over here, according to the statistics, is that, the truth is, I think everybody would agree that you don't have to go and read a statistic, a survey, research on the internet to know that the state of affairs regarding Jewish religion and the loyalty, I would say, of Jews in general to Torah mitzvot, especially in America, but I would say all over the world, and unfortunately also in Eretz Yisrael, is definitely something very this should be very worrying for us, and it's very, we feel moved by Moshe Rabbeinu's words about this covenant, but the reality of the matter is right now is that the Jewish people, by and large, are not standing in front of Hashem in a covenant. Even in Eretz Yisrael, for that matter. I'm not going to get into the statistics of that in Eretz Yisrael, between the religious and non-religious, or traditional, and so on and so forth. But in Eretz Yisrael, the situation, as we all know, is also not very comforting. And the question that I want to raise is why? Okay, obviously this is a question that has been dealt with so much by so many people. But in the framework of this very short Torah and Parashat Nitzavim, I do want to, shed the light on maybe a certain issue regarding this. So as I said, the Parsha starts with those words, Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem, and then the Pasuk carries on to say, Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem hayom. Today you are all standing in front of Hashem to make this covenant, says Moshe Rabbeinu. And the obvious question that has to be asked is that, today, that day that Moshe Rabbeinu made this covenant, wasn't the day that Am Yisrael came into covenant with Hashem. We stood in front of Hashem on Har Sinai, and over there Am Yisrael said, Naseh v'nishma, and we accepted upon ourselves a covenant with Hashem. So what was the necessity of having a second covenant? And it's true that most of the Mefarshim explain that the second covenant was necessary because Am Yisrael had annulled and had broken the first covenant with Hashem, whether it be through Chet HaEgel, the sin of the golden calf, or Chet HaMeraglim, the spies. And Am Yisrael had certainly done certain things which may be needed for them to make a new covenant. But if that was true, we'd have to ask ourselves a simple question. Then why are two covenants enough? Historically, the Jewish people have sinned in almost every generation. We look at the Tanakh and all the Avodah Zarah, and according to that logic, we would actually demand multiple covenants between us and Hashem. And the truth of the matter is, I think that Rashi addressed that question and he answered that question, because Rashi, especially in last week's Parashat Shavua and in various places in Chumash, Rashi had the habit of commenting on the word Hayom, today, not in the normal way that most of them Mefarshim explain as that day, but rather Rashi, quoting Chazal in various different ways, says and mentions the idea that Hayom, he says, for example, in last week's Parsha, Hayom, Ki'ilu Hayom Bate Imo Bebi. Today, it's as if today you came into a covenant with Hashem. Or, like Rashi says, Hayom Konim Yu Beinecha Chadashim. Each and every day the Torah must be to you new, as if the mitzvot are new. And I think what Rashi is implying by all of that is that quite so. not only did we have a covenant on Har Sinai, not only did we have a covenant on Arvot Moab, but in fact the covenant is a daily covenant. Each and every day, the Jewish people, both individually and as a nation, has to come into a covenant with Hashem, each and every day. And again, the question is, why is that? Why is that? Assuming that not each and every day we as a nation break our covenant with Hashem, why is it necessary to have a covenant every day with Hashem? A new covenant every day with Hashem? And what does it mean to have a new covenant every day with Hashem? If I have a covenant with Hashem, if I got married to my wife and I have a covenant of marriage with my wife, however many years ago, so that was a one-time issue. It's true that emotionally I should feel as excited about my marriage and my wife each and every day, but that doesn't necessitate a new covenant every day. And if it's just something very sort of like in the air and, just to make us enthusiastic about it, I'm not sure that is exactly what Chazal and Rashi had in mind. So what does it mean? What does it mean, and why is it necessary to have a renewed covenant with Hashem every day? And again, various answers have been given to this question. I want to offer what I think might be an answer, and that is for the simple reason that a person's not the same every day. A person that made a covenant or did something yesterday, today that person's a different person. The person's gone through 24 hours, the person's experienced certain experiences, the person's gained certain knowledge, certain person might have been exposed to things, and it's not the same person anymore. And today, that new person has to, I would even say, reevaluate or reconsider their covenant with Hashem and take upon themselves that covenant with Hashem as the person they are today. And obviously that it's only a kal v'chomer, how much more so over a long period of time. A person who, whatever, became religious in their youth, a person who learned Torah in their youth, when they were small, when they were a bar mitzvah or even below, when they heard stories about the Tanakh in Gan, is not the same person as an 18-year-old, as a 20-year-old, as a 30, 40-year-old. They are different people. They are grown-ups, they are adults, and so on and so forth. And a person is called upon to come into a covenant with Hashem as they are today, in the position that they are today, with who they are today, facing their Judaism, facing Hashem, in truth as who they are. And I think that's also what Moshe Rabbeinu did in Arvot Moab. Moshe Rabbeinu in Arvot Moab turns to the Jewish people and brings them into a covenant, and he tells them that we've been through 40 years of a lot of things. It's not the same nation that left Nitzavim 40 years ago. And you have to face up to Hashem, face up to your Judaism, face up to Torah as who you are today. And if this is true, then I think we are actually might be able to touch on the predicament facing Judaism nowadays. I want to just mention a very interesting anecdote that I read about of Soloveitchik very recently. Apparently, many years ago, he was interviewed when he was in Israel by an Israeli journalist, and Rav Soloveitchik over there was speaking about the American Jew, and he said the American Jew, he did it in his sort of very, the way that he spoke, eloquent way. He said that a Jew in America basically lives two different lives. He says that a Jew in America wakes up in the morning, if he's frum, and he goes to shul, and he puts on his talit and tefillin, and in that half an hour that he's in shul, he's basically a certain person. And at the end of davening, he folds up his talit and tefillin and he puts them away and he goes out into the street. He becomes an American. He becomes an American modern person. He goes to the laboratory, he goes to wherever he goes, and he's living a completely different life, a completely different mindset of a person. And then he comes home at night and he goes back to his, if you like, his Torah environment, his Torah bubble, where he might go to shul, he might go to Daf Yomi Shiur. And so he goes back to that existence of being a frum Jew until he wakes up again the next morning. And until on the weekend, when he goes home from work on a Friday afternoon, he goes again into this, if you like, religious bubble, which lasts until Sunday morning when he wakes up and becomes an American again, who goes fishing. And Rav Soloveitchik said, at the end of this comment, he said, he doesn't know how healthy this is. He even used the word psychiatrically. He says he doesn't know how viable and healthy this is from a psychiatric point of view. However, he says, but it's something which is, they say in Hebrew, hechrech muguneh, which is an unfortunate necessity. As a frum Jew has to exist and live with that unfortunate necessity of living in a split reality, which what they would call today compartmentalizing their life into two realities. And I think at the end of the day, it's very possible that the vast majority of Jews just refuse to live a compartmentalized reality, living their Judaism and their religious life in a certain mindset and having to divorce themselves from that in the rest of their lives. I'm not going to go into the details of, and I think there are a lot of areas in our lives where if we had to scrutinize our perceptives on life and try and line them up with our beliefs, I think we'd come up with quite a few contradictions. I'll just take one example to explain my point. Often when asking a person why they keep Torah mitzvot, a very common answer is because I want to serve Hashem, la'avodet Hashem, to serve Hashem. However, the modern man is basically, the concept of serving someone, of servitude in general, of slavery in general, is a very foreign concept to modern man, something which they negate, something which they can't bear, something which society has spent centuries trying to eradicate the concept of servitude. Now, obviously, a frum person would say, well, I'm serving God, not another human being. That's true, but I'm just saying that the mindset, this concept of embracing servitude, is something which you have to compartmentalize. And as I said, and again, I think there are a lot of areas very similar to that. Sorry, I'll just mention one other area which I spoke about actually with my students recently, and that is the concept of hashgacha pratit, of divine providence. As a frum person, we believe about the omniscience of God, the all-knowing God, the all-seeing God, the all-probing God, which is obviously a very basic idea of a frum person. But on the other hand, in the reality of life itself, we despise the invasion of our privacy. We despise people looking over our heads and always watching over us, something which we don't admire, and we fight for our freedom, and we cherish our freedom and our independence. Again, another issue, independence. Okay, independence is something cherished by modern man. Modern man's belief in himself. We're in a religious mindset. We do not necessarily inspire independence necessarily, rather dependence on God. I'm not saying, obviously, each thing on its own is something very noble and very admirable, which we try and educate towards. However, we have to, I think it's important to realize that often these ideas are actually contradictory. And like Rav Soloveitchik said, a frum person in the modern world has to live compartmentalize their life. And it's very possible that the vast majority of Jews, especially educated Jews, especially American Jews who are educated people, they basically just refuse to live their type of life and ultimately make a choice and reject religion. And maybe that's possibly, at least I think, a very substantial issue, which is the cause of the rejection of religion. And in conclusion, I'm not necessarily offering over here the solution to that problem. I just want to conclude with things which I mentioned in the past, and that is the famous essay of Rav Kook. Rav Kook, over 100 years ago, wrote an essay called Mamar Ador, an essay which was addressing the situation of the secular Jews in Eretz Yisrael. He was trying to explain the phenomena, or not so much to explain the phenomena, but he was basically turning to the religious people in Eretz Yisrael and wanting to guide them in how to relate to the non-religious Jews who are basically responsible for the the rebirth of the Jewish people, the coming back to Eretz Yisrael, secular Zionism. And Rav Kook over there at the beginning of the article basically explains that unlike in all generations past in the Jewish people where heretics were people that had no moral values, there were people that were bad people morally and socially. What's unique in our generation, certainly 100 years ago when Rav Kook wrote the article, is that heretical people, non-religious people, are not bad people. They're not people that are heretical because they're out for fun and they don't want to be limited. I mean, obviously there is that phenomenon as well, but Rav Kook says that is not the main, that's not the main incentive of people that are heretical in his generation. And Rav Kook ultimately says that the reason why people have turned their backs on Judaism is because Judaism and those teaching Judaism have not supplied them with sufficient explanations, with explanations which basically address them, address their issues, address their moral standings, address their demands on life. And he even says words that Judaism to them, it's below them. It's not beyond them, it's below them. And Rav Kook warned and said, is if we don't understand that, and if we don't educate in order to accommodate that, then the results will be forthcoming. And again, like I started off at the beginning, the results indeed are here in front of us, with the amount of Jews that have basically turned their backs on Torah mitzvot, on Hashem, if you like. And that is, unfortunately, in very strong contrast to how Moshe Rabbeinu starts the six parashas. Atem Nitzavim ayom kulchem. But where is everybody? Lo kulchem, not everybody is here. And that's the question I think we have to ask ourselves as Jews, as religious Jews, as Jewish educators. Where are we failing? What is it that we're not succeeding in making people understand that it's appropriate to have a covenant with Hashem even today, especially today, or even today as a person stands today in the modern world? Are we demanding people to compartmentalize their lives? Which I think people have refused to do. And there must be another alternative. There must be another way. And hopefully, I'd be very happy to hear if anybody's any input on this. I'd love to hear from anybody how to deal with the situation and how to make people stand, everybody, the whole of the Jewish people stand in front of Hashem and make that covenant, the covenant of loyalty to Hashem, to our mitzvot. Shabbat Shalom.